Have you ever been absolutely sure something happened, and then after one conversation, you started doubting your own memory? Not because the facts changed, not because new evidence appeared, but because the other person sounded calm, looked certain, and made your reality feel unstable. That is one of the most dangerous things about gaslighting. It does not begin with chaos. It begins with confusion. And most of the time, it is not obvious in the beginning. It can sound like concern. It can sound like love. It can sound like patience. But over time, it does something deeply destructive. It teaches you to trust their version of reality more than your own. Today, we are breaking down what gaslighting really is, how it works, why it is so effective, and how to recognize it before it quietly takes control of the way you think. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where one person causes another person to question their memory, their perception, their emotional reality, or their judgment. The goal is not just to win one argument. The deeper goal is control. If someone can make you doubt what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, or what you meant, they do not need to control you with force. They can control the frame inside your mind. That is why gaslighting is so dangerous. It attacks the systems you use to stay oriented in reality. Your memory, your self-trust, your ability to say, no, that is not what happened. And once those systems become unstable, the manipulator gains power without needing to look aggressive. In fact, many gaslighters do not look explosive at all. They often look calm, reasonable, measured, even wounded. That is part of what makes the pattern so difficult to detect. Gaslighting does not always sound dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like this. That never happened. You are too sensitive. You always exaggerate. You are remembering it wrong. I was just joking. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? You are imagining things. You always twist my words. Now, any single sentence can happen in a normal disagreement. The pattern matters more than the phrase. Gaslighting is not one isolated comment. It is repeated pressure against your trust in your own mind. That is the real signal. But if someone repeatedly denies obvious facts, rewrites events, dismisses your emotional reality, and leaves you feeling mentally disoriented, you are no longer dealing with simple conflict. You may be dealing with manipulation. Gaslighting usually starts small. That is why so many people miss it. In the early stage, the manipulator often tests your boundaries with low-level distortions. They deny saying something you clearly remember. They minimize behavior that hurt you. They casually frame your reaction as irrational. At first, you push back. You explain. You clarify. You repeat the timeline. You try to solve the misunderstanding. And this is exactly where many people get trapped. Because healthy people assume that confusion can be resolved through communication. Manipulators use that assumption against them. The more sincere you are, the more energy you spend explaining. And the more energy you spend explaining, the easier it becomes for them to wear you down. Eventually, many people stop asking, why are they doing this? They start asking, maybe I am the problem. That shift is where gaslighting begins to work. Gaslighting works because human beings are social creatures. We do not build our sense of reality in complete isolation. We constantly check ourselves against other people. If someone close to you confidently tells you that you misunderstood, overreacted, forgot, or imagined something, your brain does not automatically reject that. It evaluates it, especially if the person matters to you, especially if you trust them, especially if they seem calm while you feel emotional. This is where the manipulation becomes powerful. The gaslighter often creates a contrast. They appear stable. You appear reactive. They sound logical. You sound overwhelmed. They deny. You explain. And inside that contrast, you can begin to look less credible even to yourself. That is why many victims of gaslighting do not say I am being manipulated. They say, I do not know what is wrong with me lately. That sentence is often one of the clearest warning signs. The damage of gaslighting is not just emotional pain. It creates cognitive instability. The victim starts second-guessing details, then decisions, then boundaries, then identity. You replay conversations in your head over and over. You feel nervous before bringing up concerns. You collect proof for small things because you assume your reality will be challenged. You apologize more often, even when you are not sure what you did wrong. You feel mentally exhausted after simple conversations. You become more dependent on the other person's version of events. And one of the darkest effects is this: you begin editing yourself before the conversation even starts. You become careful. You over-explain. You soften your own point. You leave parts of your perception out just to avoid another round of denial. That is not peace. That is psychological conditioning. Gaslighting can happen in romantic relationships, families, friendships, workplaces, and even public social environments. In a relationship, it may look like repeated denial, emotional reversal, or blame shifting. In a family, it may sound like, that never happened in this house. You always were difficult. You are rewriting your childhood. At work, it often looks more polished. A manager changes expectations, then tells you they were always clear. A colleague misrepresents a conversation, then acts confused when you object. A group slowly frames one person as unstable simply because that person notices contradictions. Gaslighting adapts to the environment, but the mechanism stays the same. Distort reality, destabilize trust, gain control. One of the biggest misunderstandings about gaslighting is that people think it always comes from obvious villains. That is not true. Some gaslighters are cold and strategic. Others are deeply insecure and manipulative in more subtle ways. Some may not even use the word gaslighting inside their own head. But intent does not erase impact. If the repeated result is that your reality is constantly weakened, your judgment is constantly undermined, and your confidence is slowly shrinking, the pattern matters. Not just the explanation. People often waste years trying to decide whether the other person meant it. A better question is this: what is this dynamic doing to my mind? That question reveals much more. If you want to catch gaslighting earlier, stop focusing only on isolated words. Watch the overall effect. Ask yourself, do I feel clearer after talking to this person, or more confused? Do I feel allowed to have a memory, or do I feel forced to defend every detail? Am I discussing a disagreement, or am I being pressured to distrust my own mind? Do they ever acknowledge reality when it does not benefit them? Do I feel safe being direct, or do I feel trained to be careful? These questions matter because manipulation often hides inside repetition. You do not always recognize it in one moment. You recognize it when you notice the pattern the moments create. Protecting yourself from gaslighting starts with rebuilding internal trust. Not arrogance. Not stubbornness. Trust. Write things down. Notice patterns instead of arguing every detail. Pay attention to how often you leave conversations feeling disoriented. Take distance from people who repeatedly attack your perception. Do not confuse their confidence with truth. And most importantly, stop assuming that calm delivery means honest intent. Some of the most psychologically damaging people do not sound cruel. They sound reasonable. That is why awareness matters. The earlier you recognize the pattern, the harder it becomes for someone to build a false reality around you. Gaslighting is not just lying. It is the slow erosion of self-trust. It is the psychological pressure that makes a person question what they know, what they feel, and eventually who they are. And once you understand that, you stop looking only for dramatic warning signs. You start noticing the quieter ones. The denial, the reversal, the confusion, the exhaustion, the strange feeling that every conversation ends with you doubting yourself more than before. If that pattern is present, do not ignore it. Because the most dangerous manipulation is not the kind that controls your actions first. It is the kind that controls your reality.